She was just the housemaid until a carefully staged murder turned her life upside down. But the real killer was hiding in plain sight. I'm Emma Carter, an investigator who doesn't take appearances at face value. In this case, the truth was buried under lies, greed, and betrayal within one family. And the person they framed? Completely innocent. Watch closely because every detail matters, and if you stay till the end, you'll see how justice finally catches up. I'll never forget the first time I stepped into the Harris residence. The air inside was heavy, a strange mix of faint perfume, polished wood, and the metallic tang of blood that someone had tried, but failed, to scrub away. It's amazing how a house can feel alive one moment and haunted the next. Yellow police tape fluttered outside the front gates as I pushed past the reporters crowded on the street. Cameras clicked, voices murmured, but I had no time for the spectacle. My focus was on the truth. Inside, the living room was spotless, almost unnaturally so. Cushions perfectly aligned, every surface polished to a reflective sheen. But beneath the order, chaos had left faint traces. Tiny streaks on the carpet led to the study door, which stood slightly ajar. A faint, lingering scent of expensive perfume drifted from inside, almost imperceptible, but telling. The family had gathered in the drawing room. Claire, Mr. Harris's wife, dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Her grief was precise, almost rehearsed. Daniel and Olivia, the adult children, sat stiffly on the couch, faces pale, eyes darting as if any wrong move might expose them. And then there was Emily, the housemaid. She stood near the staircase, hands clenched at her sides, trembling. Her fear radiated in waves, but it wasn't guilt. No, this was the fear of someone wrongly accused, someone trapped in a nightmare not of their making. "Please, I didn't do anything," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the police radios. I studied her carefully. Panic, not guilt. Her story would hold up. It was consistent, her fear real. Turning to the family, I noticed the cracks in their facade. Olivia's quick, nervous glances when she thought no one was watching. Daniel's finger tapping against his leg just a little too fast, a little too tense. Even Claire's tears didn't feel entirely genuine. These were the subtle signs people leave when they're hiding something far darker than anyone suspects. I moved toward the study. The floor bore faint scuff marks, almost invisible in the harsh light. A drawer had been forced open. A ledger lay open on the desk, pages fanned as if rifled through in a hurry. The faint perfume lingering there would later be a key clue. I crouched near the streaks on the floor. Someone had attempted to clean the blood, but their effort was sloppy, careless. I turned back to Emily. "Tell me everything you know." "No lies," I said gently, crouching to her level. I was cleaning the living room," she stammered, voice cracking. "I heard a scream. I ran. I didn't touch him. I swear." I nodded. Her fear wasn't fabricated. And yet, the fingerprints on the murder weapon, the traces of her DNA under the victim's fingernails, they had been planted. This case was far from what the police assumed. As I left the house that evening, I knew one thing with certainty. This murder wasn't random. It was calculated, staged, and designed to frame the most vulnerable person in the household. And I was going to uncover the truth, no matter how deep the lies ran. The next morning, I returned to the Harris residence, determined to dig deeper. Something about the house felt alive with secrets, each creaking floorboard and flicker of light holding a story. I started by speaking privately with Emily, the housemaid. She was still trembling, but calmer than the previous day. I don't understand why they're blaming me," she said, wringing her hands. "I've worked here for years. I would never hurt Mr. Harris." Her sincerity was unmistakable. Fear, yes, but not guilt. She had been framed. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. Someone in this family was clever, but not clever enough to cover every detail. I began my meticulous search of the study. The ledger on the desk wasn't just filled with mundane entries. A few recent transfers stood out, sizable sums of money disappearing into accounts I couldn't immediately trace. They weren't mistakes or bills. They were calculated, deliberate, and significant. I crouched, scanning the floor again. Faint scuff marks traced a path across the rug, almost like the room itself was trying to whisper its secrets to me. Then my gaze fell on the coffee cup, slightly askew on a side table. The lipstick on the rim wasn't Emily's. It was faint, sophisticated, unmistakably Claire's. Did anyone else have access to the study? I asked Emily gently, letting her feel safe enough to answer. She hesitated. Mr. Harris's children. Olivia sometimes. Daniel too. They handle some of the finances. I wasn't supposed to go near that room when they were in there. Every small piece of information reinforced my growing suspicion. This murder wasn't random, it was planned. And Emily, the innocent housemaid, was meant to take the fall. I requested access to the home's security footage. Most of it had malfunctioned the night of the murder, conveniently for someone who wanted to stay hidden. But a small external camera recorded faint movement near the study. I replayed it over and over. A figure entered the study carrying something long and thin, most likely the murder weapon. The figure moved with confidence, deliberate, purposeful. It wasn't Emily. I double-checked her timeline with other staff. She had been in the kitchen, verified by multiple employees. There was no way she could have committed the murder. As I documented every observation, subtle cracks in the family's behavior became more visible. Olivia's careful composure occasionally slipped into nervous glances and slight tremors. Daniel's stiff posture and abrupt answers betrayed more than words ever could. And Claire, her tears and quiet sobs seemed more like a performance than grief. By the end of the day, I had formed a preliminary theory. Someone inside the family had committed the murder, manipulated evidence, and framed the innocent Maid to cover their tracks. The question was, who and why? Emily clutched my hand before I left. Will you prove it? Will they finally believe me? I nodded. I will. But we have to be careful. One wrong move, and the truth could disappear forever. I stepped out into the cool evening air, feeling the weight of the investigation pressing down on me. The story this house held was dark, tangled, and deeply personal, and I was just beginning to unravel it. Over the next few days, I spent every spare moment observing the Harris family. On the surface, they were grieving, maintaining the appearance of a close-knit household shattered by tragedy. But appearances are deceiving. I've learned that the smallest gestures, microexpressions, body language, and subtle tone changes can reveal truths that words never will. Olivia, Mr. Harris's daughter, maintained a poised, calm exterior. But I noticed the way her fingers drummed constantly against the armrest when she thought no one was watching. The way her eyes flicked toward the study, even when no one was around. And the faint smirk she tried to hide whenever the maid entered a room. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but there. Daniel, the son, was quieter, almost withdrawn. His answers to casual questions were clipped, defensive. He avoided eye contact, a telltale sign of discomfort, or worse, complicity. And Claire, the wife, oscillated between sorrow and a cold, calculated calm, as if she were constantly measuring what to reveal and what to conceal. I knew I needed more than intuition. I needed evidence. I focused on the ledger I had discovered the first day. Most entries were mundane, but a few transfers were unusual. Large sums moved out of the family accounts, disguised as routine bills or investments. The more I examined it, the more I realized these transactions were deliberate, hiding a theft that had been ongoing for months. I cross-referenced dates and times with who had access to the study. Olivia's visits coincided with the largest withdrawals, while Daniel's trips aligned with smaller, suspicious transfers. Claire's name didn't appear directly, but I had a nagging suspicion she was the one orchestrating, or at least enabling, the scheme. One evening, I managed to get access to the home's security system. Most cameras conveniently malfunctioned the night of the murder, but a small external camera had captured movement near the study. The footage was grainy, but it revealed a figure entering the room with intent, carrying what appeared to be the murder weapon. Not Emily. I revisited the maid quietly, letting her recount her story again. Every detail matched up: the timeline, her tasks, her location during the night of the murder. Every staff member corroborated her story. She was clean, and the family's story began to unravel under careful observation. I began piecing together a preliminary timeline. The murder wasn't a crime of passion. It was planned, calculated, and executed with chilling precision. Someone in this family had committed the act and framed the innocent maid. And if I was right, the motive was tied not just to greed, but to desperation. Someone had been siphoning money, and Mr. Harris had discovered it. That night, as I drove away from the Harris residence, I felt the familiar thrill of a puzzle slowly revealing its pieces. The evidence was hidden in plain sight, embedded in behavior, transactions, and tiny details. Whoever had orchestrated this crime had underestimated one thing: my refusal to accept the obvious. Emily had been framed, but soon, the truth would surface. Money doesn't lie. I've always known that. In cases like this, the financial trail often exposes the murderer more clearly than any witness or confession ever could. And in the Harris household, the trail was already whispering secrets I needed to hear. I spent long nights poring over Mr. Harris's accounts. Transfers, withdrawals, and small deposits, everything had a pattern, a rhythm. Most of the large transactions were disguised as legitimate expenses, like consultancy fees or family investments, but the timing didn't match any real obligations. One account stood out immediately: a small offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Transfers had been made over months, escalating in amount. When I cross-referenced with the family's movements, it became clear who had been responsible. Olivia, the daughter, had access to the study at the times of the largest withdrawals. Daniel's access lined up with smaller sums, but it was significant. I revisited the ledger on the desk, noticing small coded entries that had initially seemed like bookkeeping. With careful comparison, the transfers in the ledger corresponded perfectly to the missing funds. But someone had been sloppy. A single page contained faint fingerprints that didn't match Emily's, but matched Olivia's handwriting style. I began quietly interviewing staff members again, under the pretense of routine questioning. Everyone confirmed Emily's location on the night of the murder. She had been in the kitchen, preparing the next day's cleaning tasks. She could not have entered the study without being seen. With every piece of evidence, Olivia's careful composure began to crumble in my mind. She had orchestrated the theft, manipulated the timing of the murder, and framed the maid with chilling precision. Daniel had assisted in small ways, but the plan's mastermind was Olivia. Then there was the scrap of paper I found hidden under the drawer, a note with recent withdrawals, account numbers, and initials. It was subtle, almost invisible, but unmistakably Olivia's handwriting. She had made one fatal error, leaving a breadcrumb that led directly to her. I had everything I needed to start building a case: the ledger, the hidden note, eyewitness testimony confirming Emily's innocence, and financial records linking Olivia to the missing funds. But confronting her directly would be risky. She was clever, manipulative, and desperate. One wrong move, and the trail could vanish forever. I prepared a careful plan to gather the final evidence. Hidden cameras, surveillance, and confirmation from the banks would ensure there was no room for doubt. Every angle needed to be covered before confrontation. That night, as I sat alone in my office, reviewing the evidence again, I realized something chilling. Olivia had played this game for months, if not years. She had manipulated trust, hidden her greed behind a veneer of innocence, and almost destroyed an innocent woman in the process. Emily's exoneration was close, but the danger was not yet over. Olivia's desperation made her unpredictable. One wrong step, and the truth could slip through my fingers. I steeled myself for the next phase, the confrontation. I knew the confrontation had to be precise. One slip, one misstep, and Olivia could vanish into a web of lies, taking the truth and justice with her. I arranged to meet her in the study under the pretense of reviewing some discrepancies in the accounts. When she arrived, she was composed, polished, and confident, the Olivia everyone else saw. But I had learned to read the cracks beneath the surface, a slight tremor in her hands, a flicker of panic in her eyes, the almost imperceptible bite of her lip. "Olivia," I began calmly, keeping my tone neutral, "I've been reviewing your father's accounts, and some of the transactions concern me." She laughed lightly, too light, a note of unease hiding behind the politeness. "Transactions? You mean routine transfers? I manage the family finances. It's my responsibility." I slid the scrap of paper across the desk. "These transfers. The large withdrawals just days before your father's death. The ledger entries. Can you explain them?" Her composure wavered. Her eyes darted briefly toward the door, then back at me. I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice tighter than before. But the hesitation, the subtle stammer, told me everything I needed to know. I leaned closer, voice firm but controlled. "Olivia, the security footage places you near the study the night your father died. The note matches your handwriting. The financial trail is clear. Emily had no access, yet the weapon and evidence were planted to frame her. Everything points to you." Her face drained of color. For a moment, I saw the mask fall, revealing a mixture of fear, panic, and shame. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. I needed the money. I didn't want him to find out." "And framing Emily?" I pressed, my voice soft but insistent. She looked down, ashamed. I panicked. Everyone trusted her. I thought she'd take the blame. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't plan.
I didn't want him dead.
It just happened. The confession tumbled out in fragments. The thefts, the planning, the desperation, the murder, and the framing. Every word confirmed what I already suspected. Olivia had been meticulous, calculating, and ruthless, but even the most careful criminals make mistakes. I recorded everything, documenting her every word. There was no ambiguity, no room for manipulation. The evidence, combined with her confession, left no doubt. Olivia was the murderer. By the end of the confrontation, she had slumped in the chair, defeated and broken. The arrogance, the charm, the mask, all gone. She had underestimated one thing, the persistence of someone who refused to let appearances dictate truth. As law enforcement took Olivia into custody, Emily, still trembling, finally began to breathe freely. Her innocence was confirmed, and the nightmare that had consumed her life began to lift. I stood in the study, staring at the faint scuff marks on the floor and the ledger on the desk. Every detail, no matter how small, had led to this moment. Justice had been served, not by luck, but by careful observation, relentless questioning, and the refusal to accept the obvious. The morning after Olivia's confession, the Harris residence felt eerily quiet. The tension that had always lurked beneath the surface, the subtle gestures, the nervous glances, the careful performances, had finally dissolved. But the consequences of their actions lingered, heavy and inescapable. I called Emily first. Her voice trembled, but this time it was a mixture of relief and disbelief. "They're going to clear my name?" she whispered. "Yes," I said firmly. "You had nothing to do with this. The evidence proves it. You're free." Tears streamed down her face, but these were tears of vindication. Relief mingled with the lingering fear of what she had endured. "I can't believe it. They were going to ruin me," she said. By midday, the police formally exonerated Emily. I watched her step out of the house, shoulders straight, eyes bright with a cautious hope. For the first time in days, she was safe from suspicion, free from the nightmare that had nearly destroyed her. Inside, the Harris family was fractured in ways that no confession or arrest could fully repair. Claire sat silently, staring at the floor, grief now mixed with shame. Daniel looked hollow, his face a mask of guilt and disbelief as he absorbed the reality that his sister had orchestrated murder and deceit under their roof. And Olivia, once poised and confident, had been reduced to a defeated, trembling figure, facing the full weight of her actions. Even with Olivia in custody, the emotional fallout was immense. The family had to confront not only the legal consequences, but the psychological impact of betrayal and greed. Trust, once broken, is almost impossible to restore. Every member would carry the memory of what had happened and what they had failed to see. I stayed to ensure that Emily's exoneration was complete, documenting every detail, verifying evidence, and coordinating with law enforcement. This case wasn't just about catching a murder. It was about restoring truth and protecting the innocent. Later, as I walked through the study one last time, I noticed the faint streak of perfume that had initially drawn my attention to Olivia. It was a small detail, nearly invisible, but it had cracked the case wide open. Justice often begins with details others overlook, the subtle clues, the little things that point to the truth. The house no longer felt alive. It felt empty, hollowed out by greed, deception, and betrayal. But within that emptiness, there was a sense of resolution. Emily had been vindicated. Olivia was facing the consequences. And the rest of the family was left to confront the reality that appearances can deceive and secrets can destroy even the most carefully constructed lives. I left the Harris residence that evening, the weight of the investigation still settling on my shoulders. Cases like this remind me why I do this work. Justice isn't just about catching the guilty. It's about protecting the innocent, uncovering the truth, and ensuring that deception doesn't destroy lives. Even after the case was officially closed, the Harris residence felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by choices, greed, and betrayal. The house had been a stage for deception, and though justice had been served, the emotional scars lingered like shadows on every wall. I often thought about Emily, finally free from suspicion. Watching her step out of the house, unshackled from false accusations, reminded me why I do this work. She hadn't just been framed, she had been silenced by fear, almost destroyed by a lie she didn't deserve. Her courage and truth had carried her through, but the memory of that trauma would follow her for years. Then there was the Harris family. Claire, grieving and guilt-stricken, now had to live with the knowledge that she had unknowingly sheltered deceit under her roof. Daniel, silent and withdrawn, carried the weight of complicity, however small, and the horror of realizing a sister he trusted had orchestrated murder. Olivia, taken into custody, had her confidence shattered, forced to confront the consequences of years of manipulation, greed, and careful deception. As an investigator, I've learned that the truth isn't always obvious. People lie, manipulate, and hide behind facades, but microexpressions, inconsistencies, and subtle details often betray the guilty. The faint streak of perfume on the desk, the scuff marks on the floor, the hidden ledger, they all whispered the story that no one else wanted to see. The case also reminded me how dangerous desperation can be. Olivia hadn't acted out of rage. She acted out of fear and greed, manipulating those around her with cold calculation. And in her attempt to protect herself, she almost destroyed an innocent life. The fine line between self-preservation and moral collapse is terrifyingly thin. Walking through the empty house one last time, I realized something. Justice isn't always immediate, and truth doesn't always come easily. But persistence, careful observation, and a refusal to accept appearances can expose even the most carefully hidden lies. Even now, I felt the lingering tension, the emotional echoes of betrayal and greed. The family would never be the same. Emily's innocence was restored, but the shadow of the crime would remain. And I, as always, was left with the quiet knowledge that in every case, the smallest details often carry the heaviest weight. The experience was a reminder. In every investigation, the truth matters. Not just for solving crimes, but for protecting lives, restoring dignity, and ensuring that justice reaches those who deserve it. The Harris case was officially closed, but its echoes would linger far longer than the paperwork. Emily had her name cleared, Olivia was facing justice, and the rest of the family had to confront the consequences of deceit and greed. But the emotional fallout was deeper than any courtroom verdict could capture. I often reflected on the nature of truth and justice. The smallest details, the faint perfume, the ledger entries, the scuff marks on the floor, had revealed a story that appearances had tried to conceal. Justice is rarely immediate or simple. Sometimes it comes quietly, piece by piece, through persistence, observation, and the refusal to accept the obvious. Emily's freedom was the triumph of truth over manipulation, but it also reminded me how fragile innocence can be. One lie, one carefully staged deception, can almost destroy a life. Her courage, patience, and honesty had prevailed, but the experience left scars, emotional echoes that would take time to heal. As for the Harris family, their carefully constructed lives had crumbled. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Claire, Daniel, and even Olivia would live with the knowledge that greed and betrayal had festered within their own home. They had been given justice, yes, but at a price. Standing outside the house one last time, I felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. Every case teaches a lesson that truth can be hidden, appearances can deceive, and justice demands careful attention to detail. In the end, uncovering the truth isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about protecting the innocent, restoring dignity, and preventing injustice from destroying lives. Emily stepped into the sunlight, free at last. Olivia was taken away, the weight of her choices finally catching up to her. And I, walking away from the house, carried with me the quiet satisfaction of knowing that justice, however delayed, had been served. Because in the end, truth always finds a way to surface. And those who believe they can hide behind lies will eventually face the consequences of their actions.
If this story gave you chills, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen play out?